So here I've opened Sketchbook Pro 2, and we have our brush palette here, layers, and the typical color and your brush sizing properties tool here. Let's go and set up our canvas size. This is important because if you're using a dimension that's really small than your pixel dimension, then your brush strokes are going to be really pixelated. So I usually go to 11 by 17, like a tabloid format. And this gives you a larger memory size, but your image will be a higher quality. And the reason I use 11 by 17 is I'm going to have the upper and the tooling together on the same page. So I need the extra space below for the tooling. So in Illustrator, let's just jump to Illustrator really quickly. And here we have last dimensions. This is within your folder for KOK Volume 1-2. And this will have your, like a basketball shoe last. It shows some dimensions. This is 1-to-1 scale. And let's zoom in here, and you're going to see I kind of laid out some specific things to kind of think about before you start sketching a basketball shoe. So your midsole height in the forefoot, you want to set the last, which is this blue shape here. You want to set this up with a 10 millimeter midsole forefoot and a 20 millimeter thickness of foam in the heel. That's your typical heel height difference from the heel to the forefoot. In addition to that, from this dotted line here going down, you have your rubber thickness, and that's typically about 4.5 millimeters thick. And obviously it tapers as you wrap up the back and up the toe. Another thing to consider is on the last, I offset this dotted line here 2 millimeters. So you want to put that in just for some material thickness. And also in the back here, I put a heel counter, which is the plastic internal form that kind of contours to your heel to keep your heel locked in and to keep it from kind of lifting upward when you're kind of going through your motions. Another thing to look at is your eye stay. Here's typically 6 to 7 lace holes for kind of a mid-cut height. And when you look at the tooling, kind of you translate these lines downward, the bottom of the last, this is your bottom last gauge, is this inner line here. What I did was I added a typical flare out and where the rubber outer surface would be. So, typically in the back, from your last, it kind of flares out and you end up with this outer shape. Over here is your outrigger. You have your forefoot main flex zone in front of your metatarsal heads, bones of your foot, and then the pivot point, kind of like when you cut and turn, you're kind of going on the ball of your foot, and that's kind of in this zone. And lastly, an internal shank. Typically, this is about 1.5 to 2 millimeters, and you can play around with the shape of this, but this is a standard rectangular form. And this is roughly the placement. You want to kind of keep that area from flexing, especially if you scoop out the arch area and you remove foam. This shank component just really helps with stabilization of that arch. So let's go into Sketchbook Pro back in, and what I've done is I've imported this file into Sketchbook Pro. So we have this file here, and I'm going to just turn down the transparency a little. And I already went ahead and sketched kind of a design here. And what I wanted to show you is how I overlaid this design onto the last. Now, when you're sketching, you want to take some liberties in your styling. So you don't have to follow the outer shape of this last. because when this upper is assembled, things will kick in, and you just want your sketch to have a little bit more speed and sexiness to it. So if I drew, if I drew this section here, this outer line of the heel all the way to where the last was, it just wouldn't look 100% right. It would be correct, but it just won't look correct in your sketch. But the parts that you do want to maintain and not really deviate from is the bottom of the last. So you really want to make sure that you keep the foam thicknesses and your outsole thicknesses true to the tooling dimensions. And this is important because once you do this sketch and you actually go into a tech pack, you don't have to redraw in the correct proportions. You've already started with those correct proportions. So a lot of designers, they'll freehand this, and their heel is kicked off in this direction, and it's too small, and the forefoot comes way out, and it's just misaligned, and you'd have to reposition and reproportion everything, and it's just a lot of wasted time. So a way to eliminate that waste of time is just start drawing on the correct proportions. So this is all included in the video files. So just if you want to start with this before you start sketching and use it as an underlay, that's typically what I do. It just gives you a more accurate representation. So another thing to look at is here on my upper, I have my lace holes, and you don't have to conform to where these positions and these locations are. This was just a quick, setup. Here we have internal gillies that are hidden underneath the eye stay, and over here they're exposed. You can add extra ones if you plan on that, or kind of alternate and stagger the locations. So again, this last is a guide and kind of helps you set up your overall dimensions so that you can start sketching on this shoe and then get it to look somewhat realistic.